They thought they could bully me with bogus fines and threats of seizing my house. What they didn't know: I work internal affairs. And I don't just pay fines, I expose corruption. The day started like any other. Sunlight slipped between the blinds, the coffee pot hissed in the kitchen, and I laced up my shoes for the kind of quiet morning I thought I could rely on. Nothing dramatic. Just the hum of suburbia, the faint bark of a neighbor's dog, and the sound of sprinklers clicking rhythmically down the street. It was the kind of morning designed to fade into memory until I saw the envelope. It was lying on the welcome mat like a little trap, stark white against the dark wood of my doorstep. The paper was stiff, the edges too crisp, and the bold red stamp across the front made my stomach sink. HOA violation notice. I'd seen these before, tucked into the mailboxes of other neighbors, the kind of thing that carried more irritation than real weight. But when I slid my thumb under the flap and unfolded the contents, irritation gave way to disbelief. It wasn't one violation, it was a laundry list. Improper fencing. Unauthorized security system. Aggressive landscaping. I blinked, scanning each line twice, certain I'd misread. My fence was built to county code, inspected and approved when I moved in. My security cameras were installed legally, right down to the permits and receipts. And aggressive landscaping? The only thing aggressive about my lawn was the straight lines I mowed on Saturday mornings. Since when was neatness a crime? At the bottom, bold typeface spelled out the real punch: fine, $250. Due immediately. And a warning beneath it: failure to comply will result in escalating fines. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, the morning breeze rustling the paper in my hands. I wasn't new to pressure. My line of work had hardened me to bluff, bluster, and intimidation. But there was something different about this. It wasn't about the money, it was about the audacity. Someone thought they could twist rules that didn't exist and pin me under them. Neighbors often whispered about the HOA, about how notices seemed to appear like weeds after rain. Some people just paid to avoid the hassle. Others grumbled but kept their heads down. And that's exactly what whoever sent this envelope was counting on, that I'd be one more compliant name on their list. But that wasn't me. I set the notice down on the kitchen counter beside my cooling coffee and studied it like evidence. The phrasing was off. Too formal in some places, too sloppy in others. It read more like a scare tactic than an official citation. The code's reference didn't even look familiar. My gut told me this wasn't just an overzealous board, it was something more. Something deliberate. And if there's one thing I've learned in my career, it's that deliberate intimidation usually means there's rot underneath. I wasn't going to roll over, not for this envelope, not for anyone hiding behind it. I made up my mind then and there, at the next HOA meeting, I'd be there, notice in hand, ready to look whoever signed this nonsense square in the eye. Because they had just picked the wrong homeowner. What they didn't know, not yet, was that my day job was rooting out fraud, intimidation, and abuse of authority. And the deeper I stared at that envelope, the more certain I became. This wasn't about a fence, or cameras, or even a lawn. This was the beginning of something bigger. And I was ready for it. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, the kind of place decorated with folding chairs, outdated carpet, and the faint smell of stale coffee. I walked in with the violation notice tucked neatly into a folder under my arm, every word of it memorized. I wasn't there to shout. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to look the so-called authority in the eye. That's when I saw him. Gregory Tate. He stood near the front of the room like he owned the place, khakis pressed sharp, a polo shirt tucked too tight, clipboard clutched like a weapon. His walk had a rhythm to it, a strut more than a stride, like he believed the floor belonged to him. He wasn't tall, but arrogance gave him height. The moment he opened his mouth, I understood why neighbors whispered his name with frustration. Violations must be respected, he declared, voice carrying louder than necessary. This community only stays safe and orderly if every homeowner complies. Safe and orderly. The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in the mirror until they rang with authority. When the meeting opened for discussion, I raised my hand and stepped forward. Calm. Steady. I received this yesterday, I said, laying the notice flat on the table in front of him. Improper fencing. Unauthorized security system. Aggressive landscaping. I let the last one hang in the air, absurd enough that a couple of people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Gregory didn't miss a beat. He adjusted his clipboard, cleared his throat, and gave me the kind of smirk reserved for a man who thought he had absolute power. "You'll be fined until you learn to comply," he said. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Slow, deliberate, and loud enough for the entire room to hear. He wanted the humiliation to sting. I leaned forward slightly. "And if I don't?" The smirk widened. "Then we move to seize assets. Those are the rules." A ripple moved through the crowd. He wanted them to hear it. He wanted me to be the example. I studied him closely, every tick, every mannerism. His stance was wrong, his language off. Real inspectors didn't talk like this. Real authority didn't have to shout to be respected. Gregory was trying too hard, and in my world, trying too hard was the first sign of a fraud. Neighbors avoided my eyes. Some of them already looked defeated, the kind of people who had paid fines in silence. Gregory fed off it, puffing himself up with every shrug and downcast stare. But I wasn't shrugging. I wasn't looking down. I slid the paper back into my folder and straightened. "We'll see about that," I said, my voice even, my expression unreadable. Gregory chuckled like he'd already won. "You can fight it if you want. But you'll lose. Everyone loses eventually." Not everyone, I thought. Because what Gregory Tate didn't know was that I wasn't just another homeowner. My job was finding men exactly like him, people who abused authority, who invented rules, who hid behind fake badges and louder voices. And sitting in that clubhouse, surrounded by neighbors too scared to speak, I made a quiet promise. Gregory Tate's reign of intimidation had just started its countdown. The night after the meeting, I sat at my desk with the violation notice spread across the wood like evidence in a case file. A single sheet of paper, but it carried the arrogance of a tyrant. Gregory Tate's signature scrawled across the bottom wasn't just ink, it was a challenge. Most homeowners probably tossed their notices into a drawer, grumbling as they wrote the check. That was exactly what Gregory counted on. Quiet compliance. Silent wallets. But I wasn't wired that way. I logged into the county record system, pulling up the HOA's incorporation documents. My fingers tapped with practice rhythm, the screen glowing in the darkened room. Within minutes, I found the roster of the official board. President, Linda Marlowe. Treasurer, Mark Simmons. Secretary, Donna Cho. Gregory Tate's name wasn't listed anywhere. I leaned back in my chair, a smile tugging at my lips. There it was, the first crack in his armor. If he wasn't an elected board member, what authority did he really have? I started digging deeper. Property records showed Gregory owned a modest house on the far edge of the community, bought 5 years ago. Nothing flashy. But then came the interesting part, 3 liens filed against him over unpaid debts. 2 collections agencies had tried and failed to recover money. And somehow, this man was the one throwing around threats about seizing assets. Hypocrisy didn't surprise me. It fueled me. The next day, I decided to test him. I stopped by his house just after sunset. His front yard looked immaculate, grass trimmed with military precision, hedges shaped like geometric puzzles. Too perfect. The kind of perfection that screamed insecurity. A man desperate to project control. He opened the door halfway when I knocked, suspicion flashing across his face. "Evening," I said casually. "Thought we should talk about that notice." His jaw tightened. "I told you at the meeting. Non-compliance has consequences." I tilted my head, letting silence stretch. He shifted, uncomfortable. Finally, I asked, "Funny thing, I looked into the HOA charter. Your name wasn't on the board. Care to explain?" For the first time, his confidence wavered. Just a flicker, but enough. His eyes darted sideways, then back. He forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. I don't need to be on the board. I'm the appointed compliance officer. Appointed. That word hung in the air. By who? He didn't offer details, and I didn't push, yet. Instead, I smiled faintly, gave him a nod, and stepped back. Good to know. As I walked away, I could feel his stare burning into my back. He was rattled, but not broken. Men like Gregory doubled down when threatened. And that told me one thing: he was hiding something bigger. Back home, I opened a fresh notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote in bold letters, Operation Tate. Below it, I listed the questions. Who appointed him? What authority does he really have? Where's the money going? I underlined the last one twice. Because in my line of work, corruption always led back to the same place. Money. And if Gregory Tate thought he could bluff me into silence, he was about to learn how dangerous it is to pick the wrong target. The morning after my doorstep visit to Gregory Tate, I woke with one thought in my head: follow the money. Power games like his didn't survive on ego alone. There was always a pipeline, fees, fines, and the quiet cash flow no one bothered to question. I started with the HOA's financial disclosures, the ones required by law but rarely reviewed by the average homeowner. Buried in a folder on the county's website, I found PDF after PDF of yearly budgets, maintenance expenses, and vague line items. My eyes scanned quickly, trained to spot irregularities. That's when I saw it. Compliance oversight, $18,000 annually. The description was as thin as tissue paper. No vendor details, no breakdown. Just one fat number dumped into the books every year for the past 3 years. And conveniently, those 3 years lined up perfectly with Gregory's self-declared reign as compliance officer. I scribbled notes in the margin of my pad. 18 grand a year, where's it going? The trail got better. Payments were funneled through a management company, one that barely had a digital footprint. A shell, maybe. Something designed to look legitimate while lining pockets. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a low whistle. So this was how Gregory did it. Inflate fines, fabricate violations, funnel money into a shadow budget, and keep the neighborhood too intimidated to ask questions. It was clean. Not flawless, but clean enough for folks who didn't know how to look. But I knew how to look. That evening, I attended another informal HOA gathering. Fewer people showed up this time, maybe a dozen, sipping weak coffee in styrofoam cups. Gregory strutted at the front again, clipboard in hand, barking about community standards like a drill sergeant with no war to fight. I kept my expression neutral, waiting for my moment. Then, when he started rattling off the latest round of fines, I raised my hand. Quick question, Greg, I said, deliberately casual. That $18,000 compliance oversight budget, where does that go? The room went still. Heads turned. Even the coffee stopped pouring. Gregory froze for a heartbeat before plastering on his smirk. Operational costs. Necessary expenses. Such as? I pressed. Office supplies. Travel. Inspections. You wouldn't understand. His voice had an edge now, a little too sharp. I tilted my head, giving him a thin smile. Try me. His jaw clenched. He moved on quickly, rattling off landscaping violations as though the question had never been asked. But the damage was done. I saw the looks on my neighbors' faces. Doubt. Suspicion. Seeds planted. After the meeting, as the crowd trickled out, a man in his 60s lingered near me. Weathered face, hands calloused from work. He leaned in close and spoke quietly. You're not the first to ask questions, he whispered. Last guy who did, ended up with his car towed and a lien notice on his mailbox. I studied him carefully. And what happened after that? The man shook his head. He sold his house. Moved out. Just gone. I tucked the information away, nodded once, and walked out into the night. Gregory Tate wasn't just playing petty games anymore. He was running an operation, one that thrived on fear. But fear only worked if everyone stayed quiet. And I had no intention of staying quiet. The cracks had started to show. My questions at the last meeting rattled him, and men like Gregory didn't handle doubt well. They thrived on compliance, on silence, on neighbors too nervous to fight back. But once you forced them into the spotlight, their first instinct was always retaliation. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, I woke up to a bright orange notice taped across my front door like a scarlet letter. Violation, unauthorized structure. Fine, $1,000. The so-called violation? My shed. The same shed that had been standing for years, fully permitted, inspected, and signed off by the county. Gregory's inspection notes claimed it was an unapproved addition obstructing community uniformity. A phrase that meant absolutely nothing under any HOA bylaw I'd ever seen. I peeled the notice from the door, scanned it, then chuckled under my breath. It was sloppy. He was pushing too hard, too fast. Still, I played my part. At work, I filed the notice into my growing folder of evidence, adding timestamps, photographs, and camera footage. Every piece mattered. In cases like this, documentation was a weapon sharper than any blade. By that afternoon, retaliation escalated. I returned home to find a bright yellow boot locked onto the wheel of my Porsche, a handwritten citation fluttering under the windshield wiper. Parking violation, non-compliant vehicle storage. Neighbors gathered across the street, whispering as I bent down to examine the boot. Gregory hadn't even bothered with procedure. He'd slapped it on himself, no court order, no sheriff authorization. Pure intimidation. I straightened up, locking eyes with the crowd. If Gregory wanted a performance, I'd give him one. I pulled out my phone, dialed the sheriff's office, and put it on speaker. Calm, steady. Deputy Ruiz? This is the homeowner from Maple Lane. Yes, same issue. I'm looking at a private citizen who just immobilized my vehicle without cause. Yes, I have video. Yes, I'll wait. Every word carried across the street, each syllable planting seeds of doubt deeper into the minds of my neighbors. Gregory's face, pale and tight-lipped, appeared moments later at the end of the block. Clipboard in hand, chest puffed out. You can't call the sheriff on an HOA matter, he barked, voice higher than usual. Funny, I said, holding up the citation. Because last I checked, unlawful immobilization of a registered vehicle is a criminal matter. The red recording light on my camera blinked above the garage. Gregory saw it, and I swear I could almost hear the gears in his head grinding. He muttered something about community compliance before retreating, but the damage was done. He'd made his move, and I'd turned it into evidence. That night, I spread the new citations across my dining room table. Shed violations. Parking fines. Unauthorized garden stones. Each one more absurd than the last. Each one signed, stamped, and dated by the same hand, Gregory's. It wasn't about enforcing rules anymore. It was about breaking me. But men like Gregory always forgot one thing. Retaliation leaves fingerprints. And fingerprints lead straight to intent. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the stack of bogus violations. Retaliation wasn't the end of the game. It was proof the game existed. And now, it was my turn to strike back. By the time the bogus shed citation and the booted Porsche were logged into my file, I knew Gregory was digging his own grave. The trick was making sure he fell in without me having to push. Internal Affairs 101, you don't force a suspect's hand, you give him just enough rope to hang himself. So, I laid the groundwork. The first step was surveillance. My cameras were already rolling 24/7, but I repositioned 2 of them to catch every angle of my yard, driveway, and back fence. Motion alerts were synced to my phone. If Gregory so much as sneezed near my lawn, I'd know about it in real time. Next came the paper trail. I cataloged every notice, every fine, every absurd threat. Dates, times, signatures. Cross-referenced with HOA bylaws and county codes. By the time I was done, my binder looked like a prosecutor's exhibit list. But evidence only mattered if someone outside the neighborhood could act on it. That's where Deputy Ruiz came in. We'd spoken before, but this time, I laid out everything. The fake fines. The bogus citations. The unauthorized immobilization of my car. He flipped through the binder slowly, his poker face unshakable. Finally, he closed it and leaned back in his chair. "You're right," he said. "He's not just overstepping. He's impersonating authority. That's a criminal offense." "Then I've got him," I replied. "Not yet." Ruiz shook his head. "He's slippery. A defense attorney will argue he acted in good faith under HOA authority. We need something clear. Something no one can spin." I knew exactly what he meant. Catch him in the act. The following week, I baited the trap. I left my shed unlocked and placed a decoy box just inside, a box marked property records. It was empty, but I'd sprayed the lid with a fine dusting of forensic powder, invisible under normal light but perfect for catching fingerprints. Then I waited. Sure enough, 3 days later, my motion alert buzzed. I tapped the feed and there he was, Gregory Tate, creeping into my backyard like a thief. Clipboard under one arm, his other hand lifting the lid of the decoy box. He jotted something down, snapped a photo, then left the way he came. Perfect. When I checked the shed later, his prints were right where I wanted them, clear, undeniable, and in my custody. Combined with the trespass footage, it was the kind of evidence that didn't just speak, it screamed. That night, I sat at my dining room table, binder open, laptop glowing. Every piece of the puzzle was in front of me: forged violations, financial irregularities, video surveillance, fingerprints. A full dossier ready for Ruiz and the county prosecutor. But as I shuffled the papers into order, one thought gnawed at me. Gregory wasn't acting alone. The financial trail pointed higher, toward the board itself. The president, the treasurer, maybe others. Gregory was the enforcer, but someone else was giving the orders. Still, one step at a time. Take down the enforcer, then follow the trail to the masterminds. I closed the binder, slid it into my bag, and whispered to myself, trap set. Tomorrow, the fall begins. The trap had been baited, the evidence airtight. All that was left was to wait for Gregory Tate to make his next move. And knowing his ego, I didn't have to wait long. It happened on a sun-scorched afternoon. I was in my driveway polishing the Porsche when I saw him coming down the street, clipboard in one hand, violation slips tucked under his arm. He moved like a man on a mission, chin high, chest puffed, convinced he still ruled this block. I let him approach, calm as stone. Without a word, he strode up to my fence, snapped a photo, and started scribbling on his clipboard. A moment later, he slapped a notice on my gate: violation, non-compliant fence paint. The paper was so fresh it still smelled of printer ink. I peeled it off slowly, folded it in half, and tucked it into my pocket. Then I stepped forward, binder in one hand, badge in the other. "Gregory," I said evenly, "you've just written your last fine." He smirked, the same smug grin I'd seen 100 times at HOA meetings. "Or what? You'll complain again? File another appeal nobody reads?" "No," I said, sliding my badge into view. "Internal affairs." For the first time, the smirk faltered. His eyes flickered, unsure. But then he doubled down, voice louder, trying to save face in front of the neighbors peeking through their curtains. "Cue badge. This is HOA business. You don't scare me." I let the silence hang for a moment before lifting the binder. Pages rustled in the breeze: citations, surveillance photos, county codes. "You've been trespassing. You've issued fraudulent fines. You immobilized a registered vehicle without cause. Every step you've taken has been documented. Every word you said has been recorded. I gestured toward the security camera mounted above my garage, its red light blinking like an unblinking eye. His jaw tightened. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. I've got the full board behind me. You're outnumbered. Keep this up, and we'll take your house. I smiled. Funny thing about threats, Gregory. They sound a lot different when they're recorded. That's when I made the call. I dialed Deputy Ruiz, loud enough for Gregory to hear. He's here. Trespassing again. Fraudulent citation in hand. Gregory's face flushed. He shoved another violation slip toward me, trying to salvage control. You're in non-compliance. This will cost you. Enough. The word came out sharp, final. Within minutes, the wail of a siren echoed down the block. A county cruiser rolled to a stop, lights flashing. Deputy Ruiz stepped out, calm and deliberate. Sir, Ruiz said to Gregory, can I see your inspector's license? Gregory hesitated. His eyes darted from me to the deputy, then back again. I don't need one. I'm HOA authorized. Not how it works, Ruiz replied flatly. Step over here. Neighbors gathered now, whispering, some even recording on their phones. Gregory tried to argue, but his words tumbled out in fragments. Sir, you are under investigation for impersonating an inspector, issuing fraudulent citations, and trespassing on private property, Ruiz cut in. Place your hands behind your back. The click of handcuffs echoed like a gavel. For months, Gregory had strutted through this neighborhood like he owned it. But now, as Ruiz guided him toward the cruiser, clipboard slipping from his grip, he couldn't even meet the eyes of the people he once bullied. And me? I stood in my driveway, arms folded, binder tucked under my arm, watching the king of the block dragged off his throne. The net had closed. The enforcer was finished. But I knew the game wasn't over. Gregory was just the first domino. The board itself was next. Gregory's arrest was the spark. By the time the sheriff's cruiser cleared the corner, the neighborhood was already buzzing. Word traveled faster than wildfire on dry brush. People who used to avoid eye contact when I walked past were now leaning over fences, shaking my hand, whispering, "It's about time." But internal affairs doesn't stop with the first arrest. One domino always leads to the next. Gregory was just the enforcer. I wanted the architects. That night, I filed my full report. Every bogus citation, every video clip, every fingerprint lifted from the shed box. I didn't stop there. I attached the financial records too, those mysterious $18,000 compliance oversight payments funneling through the HOA's books. By morning, the county prosecutor had the file. It didn't take long for the subpoenas to drop. Detectives pulled Gregory's phone, and the text told the rest of the story. He wasn't freelancing. Orders came straight from the top, the HOA president, the treasurer, and 2 other board officers. Their messages were blunt. Stack violations until he cracks. Make it painful for him until he leaves. If he resists, we'll lien the house. Worse, they bragged about orchestrating property damage. Fence removals. Car tows. Fake landscaping fines. It wasn't sloppy mismanagement, it was conspiracy. The morning deputies showed up at the board president's door, the neighborhood gathered like it was the 4th of July parade. Lights flashing, radios crackling, uniforms moving in formation. The president tried to bluster her way through it, insisting she had legal immunity as an HOA officer. That line earned her a set of cuffs quicker than Gregory. The treasurer wasn't far behind. His house was raided, boxes of documents carried out, his wife standing on the porch with her arms folded, face pale as chalk. 2 other officers followed suit. For sets of handcuffs, for reputations shattered in one morning. The charges stacked like bricks: conspiracy to commit fraud, impersonating a public officer, harassment, attempted extortion. Gregory picked up extra counts for trespass and falsifying documents. Neighbors who'd been silent victims finally spoke up. An elderly couple revealed they'd been fined $200 for feeding stray cats when all they'd done was leave water for birds. A young family showed photos of their fence ripped out after a bogus violation. The abuse was systemic, deliberate, and cruel. Civil suits came next. My attorney filed for harassment, emotional distress, punitive damages, and full reimbursement of legal fees. Others joined in. The HOA's insurer was forced to cover massive settlements. The court's verdict was clear: the board's enforcement scheme was a willful abuse of power. Their authority was revoked, their practices gutted, and strict oversight measures put in place. The HOA, once feared, now barely had the power to schedule a block party. Gregory pled guilty, escaping with probation and community service, but branded forever with a criminal record. The president and treasurer weren't as lucky, short jail sentences, barred from HOA activity for life. The day after the verdict, I stood in my driveway. My Porsche gleamed under the sun, parked exactly where it belonged. Kids rode bikes, neighbors waved, and for the first time in months, peace returned to Maple Lane. They thought I was just another homeowner they could intimidate into silence. They didn't know I was internal affairs. And I don't just play defense. I dismantle corruption, piece by piece. Gregory walked into my trap thinking he was the hunter. He left in handcuffs. And the empire behind him collapsed right after. When the dust finally settled, Maple Lane didn't look the same anymore. The manicured lawns, the fences, the tidy flower beds, all of it was still there, but the fear that had hung in the air like humidity was gone. Neighbors smiled again. Kids chalked hopscotch on sidewalks without someone threatening to fine their parents for defacement of property. For the first time in years, the street felt like a neighborhood, not a kingdom ruled by a clipboard. Gregory was gone. The board was dismantled. Their names were whispered now, not with fear, but with ridicule. Court transcripts became bedtime reading for the curious. The story spread beyond our subdivision, picked up by county news outlets, then regional ones. The headlines were damning: HOA board charged with fraud and extortion. Suddenly, every HOA in the county was scrambling to double-check their bylaws, terrified of becoming the next cautionary tale. For me, it wasn't about headlines. It was about justice. I hadn't set out to wage war on the HOA. I only wanted peace, to mow my lawn without being harassed, to park my car without finding bogus citations taped to the windshield. But when Gregory pushed, when the board conspired, I pushed back harder. That's the thing about corruption, it only grows in silence. And silence was never an option for me. The civil judgment paid out more than I expected. My legal fees were covered, damages awarded, and punitive penalties hit the HOA's insurer like a hammer. It wasn't just about money, it was about making sure the system itself was forced to change. And it did. New bylaws required transparency, open records, mandatory disclosures of board spending. No more shadow budgets. No more mystery payments. No more Gregorys. Still, justice came with scars. Some neighbors confessed they'd lived under Gregory's thumb for so long they'd stopped believing they had rights at all. One woman admitted she considered selling her home after a bogus fine nearly wiped out her savings. An elderly man said he hadn't parked in his own driveway for 6 months, too afraid of another ticket. These stories hit harder than any legal victory. They were reminders of what unchecked power does to ordinary people. On a warm Saturday morning, weeks after the final verdict, the neighborhood gathered for something simple: a barbecue. No agendas, no fines, no clipboards. Just grills smoking, kids chasing soccer balls, and laughter echoing down the block. Someone handed me a plate stacked with ribs and said, "You saved the street." I shook my head. No. We saved it together. I just lit the fuse. Later that night, I stood on my porch, binder of evidence now tucked away in storage. The Porsche gleamed under the porch light, parked exactly where Gregory once tried to boot it. I looked around and felt something I hadn't in months: calm. They had tried to break me with fear, with fines, with fraud. Instead, they broke themselves. Because I wasn't just another homeowner. I was internal affairs. And corruption doesn't survive when someone like me moves in next door.